Trisha looked at the note for what felt like the 10th time. The handwriting was legible, but the content was crushing. Trisha, I'm sorry, but I can't go on like this. I've fallen in love with another woman, and today she and I are leaving for another city. Don't look for us. Tell the kids I love them. Hector. The woman slowly sank back into her chair, fingering the note as though that small scrap of paper could offer any comfort. It just can't be, Trisha muttered quietly. She had noticed something strange about Hector lately, but didn't want to believe it. It's true that a wife is the last person who finds out about her husband's infidelity. He used to tell her that he worked hard, that he was tired. He'd stay out late and be gone all weekend. Even the children seemed to suspect something, especially their eldest, Zach, who was now 14. Trisha knew that at his age he could understand that his parents didn't love each other and were together only because of necessity. Yet in front of the children, the woman maintained the play about a happy family. Daddy just works hard, she'd answer their questions, smiling to make it believable. He does it for us. She noticed Zach's sceptical frown, but he didn't question her further, likely to spare his younger siblings. Or perhaps he believed the adults would resolve it themselves. Trisha had long been tortured by suspicions, and she did her best to ignore them. She found long blonde hairs on her husband's car seat, even though her own hair was dark walnut-coloured and had been cut short. Just giving a ride to one of his co-workers, Trisha explained her suspicious finding. She also rationalised the smell of another woman's perfume on his clothes, the late-night messages, and the evasive looks from his friends. Why, she thought, clutching the note in her hands, why did I justify him when everything was so obvious? But the reason was easy. She was used to trusting him, or perhaps, and she had never lied to Hector, even about minor matters, throughout their 15-year marriage. Or maybe she was just terrified of shattering their stable world that she had grown so accustomed to over the years. Don't trouble trouble until trouble troubles you, Trisha's grandmother used to say. Trisha did just that, pretending everything was as it used to be, until Hector took the first step. Mum, what are we having for dinner tonight? Zach asked, peering into the kitchen. He had a knack for sensing her mood, and immediately realised something was off. Trisha flinched, attempting to hide the note, but her son snatched it from her hands after reading it for a few seconds. He sighed maturely, not surprised, as though he had long been prepared for such a situation. I see. Have you called him yet? Why? What do you mean, why? The eldest son responded, sitting next to her. Among all the children, he resembled Trisha the most, with dark hazel hair, expressive green eyes, and a straight, neat nose. But unlike the gentle Trisha, Zach was serious and wise beyond his years, as if he was preparing to take on the role of family head. You'll have to discuss divorce, alimony, and who's going to pay for the flat. We still have a mortgage for 5 more years. You're probably right. I should talk to him about it. It's just that I don't believe it's real yet. Her son sighed, covering her hand with his. I understand, Mum. This is very difficult for you right now. But we both knew this was going to happen at some point. How long has he been cheating on you? 3 years? 5 years? Trisha recoiled. I don't know, and let's not discuss that. You'd better call your younger sister and brother to dinner. Zach stood up. Okay, you're not going to tell them yet, right? No, I'll contact your father first. Trisha crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. However, despite her attempts, Hector didn't answer any calls or texts. At his work, Trisha was told that he had resigned a few days ago. Trisha also called some of his friends, and they didn't know anything either. The woman gazed thoughtfully out the window. The children were asleep, giving her time to deliberate on her next steps. After Alicia, their youngest daughter, was born 7 years ago, it became apparent that Trisha would not be able to go to work for a long time. "What's the point?" her husband had asked. "Even if you work double shifts at the hospital, your salary won't cover expenses for babysitting, cleaning, cooking. Someone has to take care of the children and the house while you are at work." Trisha sighed, acknowledging that nurses were not so well paid. "Why don't you focus on the house and the children? I'm sure we'll manage financially." So she heeded her husband's advice and resigned from the hospital where she had worked for many years. There was a shortage of nurses, and her responsible, careful nature was greatly valued, making her departure a significant loss. She hadn't wanted to quit. She enjoyed her work, but juggling it with caring for her husband and children was challenging. After leaving her job, Trisha initially felt lost. Now, her mornings were spent taking Alicia and Brandon to kindergarten and Zach to school. She would then go to the grocery shop, wash dishes, tidy up toys, do laundry, sweep and mop the floors. By the time lunch was ready, it was time to fetch the younger ones from kindergarten. Picking up Zach from school used to be part of her routine, but once Brandon started attending kindergarten, Zach protested. "I'm an adult now," he told his mother. "I can walk to school by myself." "You're only 9, Trisha objected. Zach just furrowed his eyebrows stubbornly. "The school is near the house. You already have 2 children to pick up from kindergarten, and then there's me. I'm embarrassed to walk with my mum, like a little kid, honestly." His mother sighed and agreed. Once Zach decided he was unyielding. Over time, Trisha assimilated into this home life routine and could hardly remember her working days. Their income from Hector was sufficient, and he was content to return to a clean house, a hot dinner, and well cared-for children after work. And his wife no longer smelled of iodine and other medicine. However, now Trisha was at a loss about what to do. She hadn't worked for 7 years. They still had a few more years to pay off the mortgage for their apartment. The money she had could last for a month or 2 if they cut all expenses. She hoped Hector would come to his senses and call, but she had a gut feeling that wouldn't happen. What should she do then? Where should she get money? Trisha had no one to help her. She didn't know her father, and her mother had passed away 5 years ago. "I need to find a job," Trisha thought, "or we'll end up on the street." The woman sitting across from Trisha glanced at her resume again and sighed heavily. She pushed her heavy metal-rimmed glasses down to the tip of her nose. It was nearly the end of the workday, and the employment officer wanted to get it over with and go home as soon as possible. But now she had to deal with this situation. A 30-year-old woman, the mother of 3, who hadn't worked for 7 years, having last been a nurse in a hospital. "I don't know what to suggest to you," she said. "I assume a daily duty or even full-time work wouldn't suit you." Trisha sighed and gestured dismissively. The woman snorted in displeasure. "Then I have nothing to offer you." "Nothing at all?" Trisha asked for clarification. "Yes," she said briefly, but seeing the look of desperation on Trisha's face, the woman tried to reassure. "I still have your phone number. If anything comes up, I'll call you." "Thank you," Trisha said, smiling before she walked out and carefully closed the door behind her. Once outside, she got into her old black Toyota, a car she had purchased before her marriage. Leaning back in the driver's seat, Trisha exhaled slowly. "It's okay," she muttered to herself. "I'll overcome everything." She mentally counted her remaining money. It was enough to last another month. She had already minimized her expenses, but didn't want to compromise on her children's needs. However, if she couldn't secure a job, she'd have to cut back on her activities. She considered selling her belongings. Her clothes and shoes weren't particularly valuable, but she could pawn her jewelry, laptop, and perhaps the TV in her bedroom. But what's next? Would she have to take the full-time job? What about the kids? Leave them alone from morning till night? Of course, Zach is 14, Brandon is 10 and Alicia is 7. They are not babies, and Zach has been saying that he can cope with the younger ones. Feed them, take them out of school, make them do their homework. Only, do I have the right to put the responsibilities of adulthood on his shoulders so early? But 2 weeks later, Trisha had a sudden phone call. "Hello?" she said carefully into the receiver, a sense of dread creeping over her as she anticipated an offer for some credit or a tale of a suspicious transaction on her card. Unexpectedly, the pleasant female voice on the other end surprised her. "Hello, my name is Mary Austin. Your number was given to me by the employment service. Are you still looking for a job?" "Yes," Trisha replied hastily, embarrassed by her own impulsiveness. "Good." The woman seemed genuinely pleased. "It says here you have many years of experience as a nurse, and you have worked with critically ill patients?" "That's correct," Trisha confirmed. "I'd like to ask, would you consider a position as a caregiver?" Trisha hesitated for a moment. She had never worked as a caregiver, but she reasoned it couldn't be much harder than nursing. If she could manage an entire ward, she could certainly handle one seriously ill person. "I would need to know all the conditions first," she answered cautiously. "Of course, I'll tell you everything," Mary Austin promised. "Would it be convenient for you to come to my office tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock? "Yes, of course." "Great. I'll text you the address. See you tomorrow. I'll be waiting for you." "Goodbye," Trisha replied, ending the call. Her heart pounded inexplicably. It was too early to celebrate, but the spark of hope had been reignited. After dropping the kids off at school, she drove to the appointment. Along the way, she replayed potential answers to any questions she might be asked and noted down her own queries on her phone. The office was in the city centre, inside a huge modern business centre. As Trisha stepped into the immaculate, almost silent elevator, she surmised that Mary Austin must work for some very affluent people. "Good afternoon, who are you?" A young, pretty girl, likely a secretary, greeted her in the reception area. "I have an appointment here for an interview at 10 in the morning," Trisha informed her, "for the position of caregiver." "Oh," the girl replied, surprised, yet sympathetic. But she quickly regained her composure and smiled politely. "Please sit down. I'll check everything." Trisha sat down and the secretary called on the phone and asked something quietly and quickly into the receiver. The answer was apparently positive. She then stood up, smiled at Trisha again and said, "Miss Austin is expecting you. Please come in." Trisha was escorted like royalty. She was slightly unsettled, doubting a mere nurse could receive such treatment. She even wondered if there had been a mix-up. "Hello," Trisha said briefly as she entered the office. Mary Austin was an attractive woman around Trisha's age. She had black hair tied neatly in a low ponytail, an expensive pair of glasses, and was clad in a business suit. "Good afternoon. Please have a seat." She gestured to a soft chair opposite hers. "Our records show you have extensive experience as a nurse, including care for critically ill patients. You're also interested in a caregiver position?" the woman asked. "That's correct." "Good. I represent the interests of a client who needs such a caregiver. He has been paralyzed below the waist for several years and suffers from several cardiovascular, respiratory and digestive diseases," Mary explained. Trisha nodded, showing she was attentively listening. "Physically, your work won't be strenuous. The entire house is adapted for my client's needs. It has a motorized wheelchair, elevators, handrails, etc. Medical tasks will be simple. Injections, pills, drips, and so on. Nothing you wouldn't know how to do as a nurse." "I see," Trisha said. Mary paused, as if choosing her words carefully for her next question. Then she asked, "I guess you have children?" Trisha swallowed. From that moment, the woman at the employment centre began to look at her in such a way that it became clear that she would never get a job. But there was no point in lying. "I have 3, Trisha replied. Mary nodded thoughtfully. "They're all in school? And they'll be on vacation soon, right?" "Yes, in a couple of weeks." "Are you considering a residential option? My client's house is out of town. It would be inconvenient for you to commute daily." Trisha shook her head. "I don't have anyone to leave my children with," she said sadly, expecting to be dismissed. But Mary said, "You don't have to leave them. You and your children will live together on the estate, in the outbuilding. It's a separate, cosy building. I assure you, you'll like it." Trisha looked at her incredulously. "Are you saying that we can live in the tenant's house for free?" Mary nodded and smiled. "Additionally, you won't have to cook. The meals are free, as is the lodging. You'll eat with the rest of the staff." "That sounds tempting," Trisha said cautiously, suspecting a catch. "Exactly," Mary confirmed cheerfully. "Would you like to know the work hours and wages?" "I would," Trisha replied cautiously, and Mary swiped across her tablet screen and turned it towards Trisha, whose eyes widened. "This is the weekly pay," she explained. In a week? Trisha was even more surprised. So much. "Yes," Mary sighed a little too humanly, distracting from her flawless business image. "I understand you're expecting a catch, and there is one." Trisha pressed her lips together, slowly nodded, and looked questioningly at Mary, who removed her glasses and tiredly rubbed the bridge of her nose. "My client is a unique individual with a challenging character. Not everyone can get along with him," Mary said finally. Trisha exhaled in relief. "That's it? I've encountered all sorts of people in my years at the hospital. We didn't receive additional pay for dealing with difficult personalities." "It's not quite that simple. I can't guarantee a stable work schedule. Essentially, if my client decides he needs you at 2 a.m., you will have to wake up and be there." "But everything you'd mentioned before is accurate?" "Yes. The salary, as I previously mentioned, is paid weekly due to high staff turnover. You and your children will live in a separate building and have meals provided. If you or the children need transportation, a car with a driver will be available. So, in return, I must care for an irritable elderly millionaire and be ready to serve at any moment." "You could say that." "I'm ready," replied Trisha. "When can we start?" After some time spent on paperwork and waiting for the children's holiday to start, they finally packed up and headed to Mr. Arnold's estate. "Mum, is he some sort of madman?" Brendan asked. "We're going to an isolated place." Trisha flushed, aware that the driver Frank was listening. He had been sent by her new employer. "Brandon," Trisha scolded, "we're not just going anywhere. It's a closed settlement. Mr. Arnold is an ordinary person. Please mind your words when you meet him. This job is crucial to me." "Mr. Arnold will likely only meet you," Frank interjected. "He isn't fond of new people. Also, he instructed me to take you directly to the outbuilding." "I see," responded Trisha. Shortly afterward, they arrived at the settlement. "Wow," Brandon explained. "If there are people living here, they must be very wealthy." "Brandon," Zach chuckled, while Alicia almost hit her forehead against the glass, straining to see everything. Once they drove through the entire settlement, they reached a large area enclosed by an elegant yet tall wrought iron fence. The driver pressed a button on a small black remote and the gate swung open. "We are now entering the estate grounds," Frank commented. They drove for a while along a road lined with neatly trimmed trees. A massive modern house made of glass and metal loomed ahead. However, the car veered left and didn't head towards the mansion. A few minutes later they pulled up to a small, tiny wooden house. Upon entering inside, Trisha noticed that despite its compact exterior, the house was surprisingly spacious inside. The small entryway led directly into a living room that also served as a kitchen and dining room. A large ensuite bathroom was available, and, most importantly, there were 4 bedrooms. "Wow!" Brandon squealed. "Am I getting my own bedroom?" Trisha smiled. "It appears so." In their apartment, the brothers shared a room, while only Alicia had her own. Zack gazed at his mother and smiled. "He's all grown up now," thought Trisha suddenly. "He needed a separate room a long time ago." Meanwhile, Frank had already brought in all their things and said, "Settle down, rest. They'll probably call you for dinner in about an hour. That's when you'll meet everyone." "Thank you, Frank," said Trisha sincerely. He smiled. "It was a pleasure to meet you all. I hope you enjoy it here and decide to stay." In the hour they had, everyone managed to unpack their things and start getting used to their new surroundings. "Mummy, I really like it here," exclaimed Alicia, running up to Trisha and hugging her legs. Trisha smiled and stroked her daughter's hair. "I'm very glad," she said. "I hope you won't get bored here while I work." Just then there was a knock at the door, and a tall, fair-haired, brown-eyed man entered the cottage. He was dressed simply in a white t-shirt and black jeans, but his confident demeanour suggested that he played a significant role there. "Good afternoon, everyone," he greeted first. "My name is Nick. I'm Mr. Arnold's assistant and the manager of this house." "Pleased to meet you," she replied. "My name is Trisha, and these are my children, Zack, Brandon, and Alicia." "How do you do?" greeted the children in unison. Nick smiled. "I'm very glad. I'm sure you'll liven up our sleepy kingdom. Now, let's all go have lunch." He led them down a path that led to the side entrance of the mansion. Through this door they entered a large, cosy kitchen. "Here are our newcomers," greeted a cheerful woman's voice. Trisha saw a slightly overweight woman in her 50s. "I'm Sarah," she said. "I'm in charge of food in this house. Please join us at the table." Trisha introduced herself and the children, and they took their seats at the table. There were about 10 other people there, all employees of the manor. They introduced themselves to Trisha, but she was so nervous that she merely smiled and nodded in response. Nick sat to Trisha's right. "Don't worry," he whispered in her ear. "You'll remember everyone in a couple of days." "How do you know what I was thinking?" Trisha asked. "It's not difficult. When I got a job here myself and everyone was introduced to me, I thought the same thing." Trisha grinned. Her initial fear had subsided. Everyone seemed very nice and friendly, and the kids were well behaved. After lunch, Nick took Trisha to meet the boss, while Frank volunteered to give the children a tour of the estate. When Nick and Trisha stopped in front of the office door, her employer's assistant looked her gently in the eyes and said, "Trisha, remember any comments that Mr. Arnold makes are not personal. He is just an elderly man with a difficult past and a bad temper. That's why we're offering you a good salary and luxury conditions." "Thank you for saying that, Nick, but don't worry, I'm tougher than I look." "I'm sure you are." Nick smiled, and then he knocked and opened the door. "At last," came a creaky old voice. "I thought I was going to die in here before any of you decided to come in. I wonder why I pay you all such a high salary." In a chair by the window sat an old, hunched man. Trisha immediately thought he was the type of character depicted in books as an evil old relative to a poor orphan. It was clear that Mr. Arnold was once a tall and robust man, but age had made him frail, drawing him closer to the ground. His shoulders remained broad, even a little proudly so. With his short grey hair, stubble, long straight nose, tightly closed lips, and eyes that were angry and prickly, he looked at Trisha coldly. His eyes, once probably blue or green, were now so faded it was hard to tell. With those eyes, he studied Trisha as if scanning her, checking what was inside her. "Who is it?" he asked Nick, ignoring Trisha as if she weren't capable of answering. "This is Trisha," Nick replied. "She'll be your new nurse." "Hello, nice to meet you, Mr. Arnold," Trisha said, unwilling to stand around waiting to be addressed. The old man frowned unhappily, as if he had tasted something sour. "Yes," he said. "They get worse every time. Fine. Nick, we'll see how we can work with her later." The assistant gave Trisha one last smile and left. Without Nick, Trisha instantly felt vulnerable, but she was unwavering in her decision to not let her mentee ruin her mood. She needed this job. She liked the cozy house where they were located, and she appreciated not having to go anywhere. And she certainly had no plans to leave within a week. So, Trisha composed herself, smiled, and said, "Well, where should we start? Maybe I should shave you first. You look more like a homeless man than a millionaire." Why did I say that? She thought in horror. I wanted to discuss my skills, how I'm a highly qualified nurse. Now he's going to fire me for sure. Mr. Arnold raised his thick eyebrows and unexpectedly burst into laughter. "Like a homeless man," he exclaimed. "Well, if that's the case, lead me to the bathroom." "Where's your bathroom?" she asked. The old man rolled his eyes. "Now, that's professionalism at its best." He pressed a button on the arm of his chair and started moving. Trisha had no choice but to follow him. Mr. Arnold led her to a large, spacious room. Trisha had a few seconds to take in her surroundings and was amazed at how conveniently everything was arranged. She found a cape, shaving foam, and a shaving machine. "Do you even know how to use these?" Mr. Arnold asked doubtfully. "I do," Trisha replied calmly. "The last time she used it was a while back, when she was still working at the hospital. One of the patients asked her to shave him before neck surgery because he couldn't do it himself. His hands were shaking." "I'll manage," Trisha thought. After finishing her work, she looked at the result with satisfaction. "There," she said, turning her ward towards the mirror. "An entirely different look." Mr. Arnold saw himself and was aghast. "What have you done, you fool?" he shouted. "Couldn't you at least leave a few millimeters? Why did you cut everything to 0? Now all my wrinkles and folds are visible. I look like I'm about to die." Trisha swallowed but decided not to show fear. "It's unhygienic," she said sternly, "and it looks better on you. Trust me as a woman." The old man chuckled. "Have you ever had a man, woman? You look like an old maid." Trisha flared up. She had arrived here in a simple dress without makeup and her hair in a ponytail. "Don't worry," she said dryly. "I have 3 children." Mr. Arnold whistled. "And with different men?" he said snidely. "From one." "Well, he's an interesting type. He has 3 children and sent his woman to work." Trisha pressed her lips together. "We broke up." "Why? Did you piss him off, so he ran away?" "That's none of your business," Trisha answered, sharper than she intended. "What's next on the plan?" "Take the tablet from the table," the old man grumbled. "There should be left a detailed schedule." Trisha found the tablet at the indicated place. She looked over it. Indeed, there was a lot to do. It seemed that Mr. Arnold was seriously ill, judging by the number of pills and injections he required daily. "Have you had lunch yet?" the woman asked. "No, I was waiting for you. Of course I've had lunch." "I see." Trisha decided not to respond to his rudeness. "Then you can take a rest and Then you take a rest and I'll make an IV now." "You're a genius, I see." She clenched the tablet, her fingers turning white. but said nothing.
"Should we start the drip with you lying down?" Trisha, gathering her courage, once asked Nick if their boss had a wife and children.
"As far as I know," he replied, "no children. But he had 4 wives."
4?
Trisha gasped. "Yes, he married his first wife when he was quite young. I think she was from a wealthy family, and he was either working for her father or they were in business together, I'm not sure. It was a marriage of convenience, and in the end they divorced. Then he married a model who was 10 or 15 years younger. They were together for 3 or 4 years, but he caught her cheating and divorced her as well. The third wife left him. She was a young and pretty girl, and she quickly got bored with him."
"Wow," Trisha sighed. "And the fourth?"
"The fourth was an old friend of his. They were the same age and had known each other for a long time. They married when they were both over 50. They seemed to have a good life together, but she died about 5 years ago of cancer."
"That's sad," Trisha commented.
"Yes, those who have been working here longer than me say that's when he changed. He was supposedly quite bearable before. Not an angel, of course, but one could live with him. Now he's becoming more difficult each day."
"That's sorrowful. Does he have any relatives?"
Nick shrugged. "He has a sister who has her own children and grandchildren, but they live abroad and rarely visit."
"He's a very lonely man," said Trisha.
"It's sad to be so sick and to live alone in a huge house." "True," replied Nick. "He takes his frustrations out on those around him."
Every evening, Trisha looked forward to the end of the workday when she could finally spend time with her children. They had settled in quite well. All the staff on the estate were friendly towards Zach, Brandon, and especially little Alicia. Sarah treated them with treats. Frank would take them for rides, with Trisha's permission, when he had errands for the boss. They loved exploring the estate with its massive garden and many beautiful quiet corners. They only made sure to avoid the master of the house, which was not difficult. Mr. Arnold only went for walks with Trisha, usually in the morning and occasionally in the afternoon or late evening. After 2 weeks, Trisha was reminded for the first time of her irregular working hours. She and the children had long been asleep when her phone suddenly rang. It was Nick.
"Trisha, rush to the house immediately. Mr. Arnold is having a seizure."
Instantly awake, Trisha remembered she had been warned that her patient could have such attacks. Without bothering to dress, she threw on a robe and rushed into the house. She quickly entered the bedroom. Mr. Arnold was half lying on the bed and breathing so hard that she heard his whistles and wheezes from afar. Next to him was Nick, who had already opened the windows and was gathering the medical supplies. Nodding in gratitude, she began to work. She placed an oxygen mask over Mr. Arnold's face and started the oxygen supply. She then found the necessary medication and administered it. Thankfully, the attack wasn't severe, and the drugs took effect quickly. "How are you, Mr. Arnold?" she asked, once his pulse and breathing had stabilized. The old man wheezed.
"For the man who nearly died, I'm well."
"You need some hot tea," Trisha suggested. "I'll have it made right away."
"Good," he replied. "Also, I have one more favour to ask. Will you do it?"
Trisha nodded. "Yes, of course. What is it?"
"Hurry up next time, or you'll be too late."
Trisha felt her sympathy for the old man evaporate. "I'll try," she replied coolly. "I'll go and arrange for the tea." After she had asked for the tea to be made, Nick came into the kitchen.
"How are you?" he asked.
"Fine."
"That's just the way he is. He'll play the scumbag till the end, even when he's dead."
"Play?" Trisha asked. "That's the way he is in my mind." The manager sighed and ran his hand through his hair.
"You know," he said in a confidential tone, "I sometimes think the boss isn't really like that. He just decided at some point that this was the only way to communicate with the world, and he's now afraid to act human."
Trisha shrugged her shoulders. A noble version, Nick, but I'm sorry. I believe he's being sincere.
Nick smiled. Would you like some coffee? He suggested.
No, I'd rather go to bed. Good night.
Good night, Trisha.
The next day, when Trisha and the children came for breakfast, Nick made an unexpected announcement.
Trisha, you have the day off today.
Why is that? She wondered.
The manager shrugged. The chief said so. His sister's visiting him with the kids. I guess they'll look after him.
Trisha frowned. And the injections? The drip? Nick waved his hand.
Don't worry, we call a nurse from a private clinic.
And why doesn't she come every day? Why do you need me?
The boss doesn't like new people.
Sarah suddenly chimed in with a smile, who was serving cheesecakes to the children.
That's why he insists on having someone permanent, someone who knows all of his habits.
I see, Trisha replied. She added mentally, so he drives people crazy and makes them quit. A permanent slave is more pleasant to abuse than nurses from a private clinic who will be different every time. She didn't say it in front of the children because she wanted them to believe she had a good job.
We've almost all been given the day off,
Frank chimed in. If you don't mind, Trisha, and you guys too, I can take the kids to the zoo, and we can stop for lunch somewhere on the way.
Hooray!
Alicia cried joyfully. Of all three, she was the closest to the young, cheerful driver, who always paid attention to the children. No, my dears, Trisha said firmly. Frank has the day off and I can't impose on him. But the driver dismissed her concerns. Don't worry, Trisha, he said. I'm going to the zoo with my nephew, who's 10. I can take your kids too. It's not a problem for me. Trisha looked at the children with doubt. We'll behave, Brandon pleaded with his mother. Zach shrugged his shoulders, saying, I'll go if I have to. All right, she sighed. Then I'll go get the money.
You don't have to, Frank replied. The boss always leaves us money for small expenses.
Don't even worry about it, Sarah assured her. After breakfast, Frank and the children went to the garage to start the car. Only Nick and Trisha remained in the kitchen. Do you have plans for the weekend? Nick asked Trisha. I'm not sure. I guess I should go to the city and check on the apartment. Nick perked up.
Do you want to go together? I've got a couple of the boss's errands to run. It won't take long, and then we can check your apartment. We could have lunch on the way back, if you don't mind.
Yes, we can, Trisha replied. With Nick, she felt at ease and comfortable. He knew how to keep a conversation going without being intrusive. He spoke interestingly about his current affairs without revealing too much. Trisha realized how much she had been missing simple human interaction. After she resigned from her job, her life revolved around her husband and children. She had friends from college and work, but they had their own lives, husbands, children, work, and couldn't meet too often. After Hector's leaving, she retreated into her troubles. Worrying about job prospects, mortgage payments, and her children's feelings consumed her. She had no time for herself. How long have you been working for Mr. Arnold? She asked Nick. Nick thought for a few seconds, then replied, 5 years. That's a long time, she exclaimed. Well, except for you, I'm probably the newest in the house. Amazing. How do you all manage to stay? Has he always been like this? Nick laughed. When I started, he was perhaps a little gentler, but he wasn't particularly kind. I can't deny that I've had my difficulties with him. I can imagine, Trisha sighed. For the first 6 months, I wanted to quit about 7 times a day. Eventually, it became less frequent. Now, I don't think about it at all, Nick confessed. Trisha frowned. Why? Is it the salary? It plays a part, yes, but it's not the only reason. What else, then? Trisha was curious. Nick seemed so smart and confident. Unlike her, he could probably find many great jobs elsewhere. Experience, Nick replied. I not only manage the house, but also help Mr. Arnold to conduct business remotely. Although he looks so weak and decrepit, his brain is still sharp, and I'm doubtful I could find another job that would let me learn how to manage such large capital." "I see," said Trisha, "but your life seems to revolve around Mr. Arnold. Don't you find that a pity? I assume your wife and children hardly see you at home." Nick laughed. "Of course I don't look very young," he said, "but I'm only 33. Trisha was embarrassed. "I don't know what you mean," she admitted. "And you look wonderful." "Thank you. I'm flattered. It's not every day I get compliments from such beautiful women. I meant I don't have a wife and children yet." "Fiancé?" "No." "Girlfriend?" "No. Does that look suspicious?" Trisha laughed. "A little," she admitted. "I'm just a workaholic. I want to start a family when I'm sure I can provide for them. By the way, we're here. Can you wait? It's just 15 minutes, then we'll drive to your apartment." "Sure," Trisha replied. Nick grabbed some folder with documents and left. Trisha was left alone in the car. She thought that perhaps, like Nick, she might find herself tied to this house and the mean old man for years to come. It's summer now, but what about in the fall, when the kids go to school? She suddenly realized that Mary Austin, who had hired her, hadn't discussed this issue with her. Likely because she hadn't expected Trisha to stay for so long. But Trisha is holding on, and she's not going to quit. "No, you, Mr. Arnold, won't get it." She bit her lip painfully, remembering last night. She had been truly afraid for him then, and for the first time had felt sorry for him. But he, as soon as he could breathe, immediately insulted her. Nick came back and interrupted her sad thoughts. He looked pleased. "Let's go to your place?" "Let's go." It was unlikely, as if anything could happen there, but Trisha was still more used to being in control. "Now for lunch," said Nick cheerfully. "I'll show you a wonderful place." "I don't think they cook there as well as our Sarah does," laughed Trisha. "Oh, yes," Nick sighed, "but I'll still try to surprise you." He took her to a large French restaurant situated on the top floor of a high business centre. The pleasant music playing and the air conditioners operating at full blast were a welcome respite from the hot summer day. They were led to a table with 2 comfy sofas by the window, offering a view of the river and the bridge. "Would you mind if I chose for you?" Nick asked. "Go ahead," Trisha cheerfully responded. "I am not familiar with everything here anyway." "Fine," Nick replied. When the waiter came up, Nick pointed his finger at several items on the menu without showing Trisha. So she didn't know what to expect, and was very surprised when the first thing they bought her was a glass of red wine. "It's only lunchtime, isn't it?" she reminded her companion. "So?" Trisha sighed, unable to find any other argument. "And you won't have any?" "I'm driving." "Right." The wine was a balanced mix of moderate sweetness and tartness. Trisha savoured the taste, realising that she couldn't recall the last time she had simply sat and spent time leisurely with a glass of wine. "Thank you," she said. "This is the most wonderful day of last year." Nick smiled. "Wait to thank me," he said. "The meal hasn't arrived yet." "Tell me about yourself," Trisha requested suddenly. "You're quite the mystery to me." The man's eyebrows rose in amusement. "Now that's a confession. Why am I a mystery?" "It's just that I know nothing about you," she admitted. "Neither do I about you," Nick retorted. "Fair enough, but let's start with you." Nick hummed in agreement. "Well, let's. I'm not from around here, born in a small township far away from here. I attended an ordinary settlement school, grew up in an ordinary family. But I always had big ambitions. That's why I decided to come here. It wasn't easy, but I managed. My student years were fun, then I got a job, then I changed 5 more jobs until I got to Mr. Arnold. And the rest you know." There's a feeling that you skipped a lot in your story, Trisha remarked thoughtfully. Who knows? Maybe I'll tell you about it later. Now we are going to talk about you, he urged. Okay, well, I don't have anything interesting either. I'm from here, but I was raised by my mum. I never knew my father, and my mum didn't tell me much about him. She was a music teacher, so we lived modestly, she confessed. Did you go to music school? Trisha sighed. Oh, yes, 2 long years of my life. I only remember one tune now. My mother made me play it most often. Everything else faded from my memory. I've played it so many times that if you woke me up at 2 a.m., I'd play it with my eyes closed. What's the tune? Bach? Chopin? Tchaikovsky? No, it's not classical, that's for sure. Honestly, I don't even know. My mum never told me who wrote it. I have a theory that she composed it herself, but I can't confirm it, she shared. Do any of your children go to music school? No, Trisha responded curtly. Unlike you, I didn't study very well, Trisha continued. For some reason, I suddenly decided that I wanted to be a nurse. I thought it was a beautiful, noble, and romantic profession. It is, said Nick. Not a bit, sighed Trisha. No, I don't regret it. I found studying interesting and working as well, especially at work where I met Hector, my husband. He was your patient? Yes, I had just started working and I didn't know how to do anything myself. I remember even my hands were shaking when I was giving injections or dressings. I thought it was obvious, but Hector didn't notice. Nick smiled. I'm sure he fell in love with you at first sight. He said he did. In fact, I liked him too. We started dating soon after, and 6 months later we were married. Shortly after, I found out I was pregnant. You've become a very young mum, Nick smiled. Yes, the first time was difficult, but then my mum was still alive. She helped me a lot. Trisha sighed. Then Zach grew up, went to kindergarten, and I went back to work. However, when he turned 4, I got pregnant with Brandon, and 3 years later, Alicia was born. After Alicia was born, we decided I'd stay at home, so I didn't work for 7 years. Wow, said Nick. I must say you're doing a great job, especially after such a break. Trisha smiled. Thank you, that's nice to hear. Can I ask you a personal question? Nick asked. Trisha took another sip of wine. Why did I split up with my husband? Yes. He left me, Trisha confessed, possibly influenced by the wine. He just left a note saying he was in love with another woman. He didn't even talk to you? Trisha shook her head. What about the children? He didn't even say goodbye to them either. How awful! And child support? Trisha smiled sadly. It's all right. I'm fine now. That's why you're hanging on to this job. Exactly. They fell silent for a few minutes, contemplating the conversation they just had. Then Trisha asked, What about your love life? You're only 2 years younger than me. I can't believe you haven't had a serious relationship. Nick smiled sadly. I have, and quite a long one. When I was still at college, I dated an ambitious girl. We both had ambition, but our goals were different. My ambition was career-focused, while hers was to find a successful man. Aren't you a successful man? Asked Trisha in surprise. Well, thank you for such a compliment. It's hard for me to assess myself. Then I say you are a successful man, interrupted Trisha. Much obliged, replied Nick with a smile. Well, regardless, my girlfriend at the time did not see me as a successful man. She broke up with me, saying she deserved better. A very foolish woman, Trisha commented. After that remark, I need to get you more wine, said Nick, signalling the waiter. So she left me and I decided to become a successful man so she would come back to me. And how's that going? Great! Along the way I realized that I don't want to be with a woman who doesn't value me for who I am, but for my social status. Trisha nodded. And I don't want to be with a man who left, leaving only a note on the table, she said. Nick smiled sadly. I fully support such a wise decision. In the morning, Trisha awoke with difficulty. Her head was throbbing, her mouth was dry, and the sunlight streaming through the curtains seemed unbearably bright. I've overslept. I probably didn't even set my alarm clock last night. But the clock indicated that it was still early. Trisha showered and brushed her teeth. Ensuring that the children were still asleep, she quietly went to the main house. Sarah was already bustling about in the kitchen. "Oh, Trisha," the woman greeted her cheerfully. "Good morning. You're up early today?" "Yes," Trisha replied hoarsely. "I seem to have had a wild day off yesterday." Sarah smiled understandingly. "You'll be fine. In an hour you'll be as cheerful as a 15-year-old schoolgirl." Soon she placed a large cup of fragrant tea, redolent with berries and herbs, before Trisha. "The best cure for a hangover," Sarah declared confidently. "And eat this." She placed a plate with a large sandwich with meat, lettuce, tomatoes and eggs in front of Trisha. "This is the most delicious thing I've ever eaten in my life," Trisha said blissfully as she ate her breakfast. "You're magic." "Thank you," Sarah replied, embarrassed. By the start of the workday, Trisha had recovered significantly, and Mr. Arnold was unusually amicable today. Perhaps his meeting with his relatives had influenced him, but he barely critiqued Trisha's actions and refrained from derogatory remarks. "You're surprisingly quiet today," Trisha commented during their traditional afternoon walk after lunch. "It's not evening yet," Mr. Arnold responded, but without malice. "Those are your children, right?" He pointed to Brandon and Alicia, who were chasing each other around the fountain. Zach was sitting on a bench reading a book with one eye and keeping an eye on the younger ones with the other. "Yes, mine," answered Trisha, fearing a reprimand. But Mr. Arnold simply nodded. "They're good kids, and they seem friendly." "Thank you," Trisha replied cautiously. "Are you raising them alone?" The boss continued his unexpected interest. "I'm alone now," she replied. "That's why you put up with me," he said, not as a question but as a statement. Trisha didn't respond. "I too wanted to have many children when I was young," Mr. Arnold suddenly disclosed, "but it didn't work out." "You've been married 4 times, haven't you?" Trisha asked in surprise, then regretted her words. She wasn't supposed to know such information, but surprisingly the chief didn't comment on it. Mr. Arnold seemed to gaze into the distance, as if mentally reviewing his entire life. "My first wife didn't want children, and at the time neither did I. We were young and spoiled, both from rich families. We wanted to have fun and enjoy life. Or rather, my wife did. I was more interested in building a business." "So why did you get married?" Trisha asked. "The parents insisted. It was beneficial for the common cause. I wasn't against it. She was a pretty girl, and I thought we'd be fine. But after a few years it became clear that we were entirely different people. I got divorced and went to work." He paused. "Could I have some water, please?" Mr. Arnold suddenly asked. Trisha quickly handed over the bottle. Mr. Arnold took a sip and continued. "I have almost nothing to say about my second and third wives. I married them for status. They were young and beautiful. I thought it would be great, but each time I quickly realized it wasn't what I wanted. All they wanted from me was money." He paused again. Trisha offered more water, but the man shook his head. "There was a time when I could have experienced true love." "Your 4th wife?" "No, that was before her. I didn't marry that girl. I've regretted it many times since, but I don't want to talk about it. It's too personal." "So everything else isn't too personal?" Trisha thought, puzzled as to why he chose to share all this with her. "My 4th wife has become more of a friend," said Mr. Arnold. "I already knew about her diagnosis when I proposed marriage." "Diagnosis?" Trisha asked. "Yes, she had cancer. We had known each other for years. Our parents had been friends since childhood. Over the years we kept in touch intermittently. Then we met, talked, and decided to spend a few years together.
Were you with her until the end? Trisha asked.
Mr. Arnold nodded. She was a wonderful woman and a true friend. After she died, I didn't want anyone else.
I sympathise with you, Trisha said sincerely.
After her words, Mr. Arnold seemed to snap back to reality. We're talking too much, he said. Let's go home. It's time for my evening pills.
Following this peculiar conversation, Trisha again felt pity for her boss. Their communication didn't improve significantly, yet she found his harsh words easier to bear. As summer was ending, Trisha began to consider the approaching school year. How do you like it here? She asked her children.
I like it very much, Alicia answered first. Anya cooks deliciously. Frank takes us everywhere. There's a big garden and we can play all day long.
You'll be going back to school soon, Trisha reminded her. Her daughter made a funny face.
I don't want to go to school, she said.
Trisha sighed and looked at her middle child.
I like living here too, Brandon said, but I understand that we have to return to school in the city.
Brandon sighed. Then Trisha looked at her eldest son.
I think we need to talk, Zack said and led his mum to the yard. Summer is ending. We'll all have to go back to school soon and consider our accommodation situation.
Trisha smiled, saying,
You're as rational and serious as ever.
Their son nodded, confessing,
Daddy called me the other day.
Trisha's eyes widened in surprise. Why didn't he call me?
I guess he's afraid, but the official reason is that he's very busy.
I see, Trisha sighed. What did he want?
As far as I can understand, he wants to meet with you, perhaps to discuss the divorce, or maybe he wants to reconcile.
Trisha laughed, exclaiming,
Reconciliation? Well, maybe.
Trisha hesitated before asking her son, Do you want that to happen?
Zack shook his head, saying, I don't mind if Brandon and Brenda see him, if they'd like to. I'll see him too if necessary, but the rest is for you to decide.
He is your father, she reminded,
but I don't think I love him any more, and I can't forgive what he did. You don't have to forgive him. Regarding our school, why don't you talk to Nick? He might come up with something.
I'll try. You're the smartest, as always. Trisha hugged her son.
Everything will be all right, Mum, he assured.
Tell your father I'm ready to talk to him. Let him call me.
I'll tell him, promised Zack.
A few days later, after Trisha and Mr. Arnold had completed their morning routines, Nick came into the room.
Ready, Mr. Arnold?
Asked the assistant.
Absolutely, let's go. You're coming with us too, replied the boss, addressing Trisha.
Me? She looked surprised.
Sure, Mr. Arnold replied calmly. I have a lot of paperwork to sign and several face-to-face meetings to attend. I may need you at any time. What if I have a seizure? I don't want to suffocate in front of my business partners.
As they drove to the business centre, Nick said,
We're not sure how long it will take, so you can wait for us in the restaurant. It's in the same building on the top floor. Just ask them to bill everything to Mr. Arnold.
Okay, Trisha replied.
If I need anything, Nick will call,
Mr. Arnold added. At the restaurant, Trisha ordered tea and tiramisu. She suddenly thought that this would be the perfect opportunity to meet her husband. He seemed to be in town, and they had pressing matters to discuss. She called him and he agreed to come over.
What a nice place you picked,
he said as he sat down at the table. Hector had not changed much, except for losing some weight.
You look wonderful, he complimented.
Thank you, Trisha replied. You too.
He shrugged shyly. I'm glad you called.
Trisha sighed.
We should have talked a long time ago, at least to decide when to file for divorce. That's precisely what I wanted to discuss, Hector said, and moving closer, He gently placed his hand on hers. "Perhaps we were hasty," he suggested. "Maybe we don't need a divorce." "We were hasty?" Trisha asked incredulously. "It was you who left me. Left a note and didn't even say goodbye to the children. You didn't answer calls or messages and just disappeared from our lives as if we meant nothing to you after 15 years of marriage." Hector squirmed uncomfortably in his seat. "Forgive me," he said. "I don't know what came over me. It was like some kind of lapse of mind." Trisha sighed and pulled her hand free. "I won't ask you how long you've been unfaithful or why you decided to leave. But why couldn't you talk to me properly? Why did you abandon the children?" Her husband lowered his eyes in shame. "I don't know, Trisha," he confessed. "I think it's a midlife crisis. At some point everything just became too much. The work, the household chores, the 3 kids. You were always with them and I felt sidelined. I was tired of this damn life full of duties." "Is your new love young, fun, carefree, childless?" Trisha asked. "Sort of. I lost my head back then. I didn't have the courage to tell you or the kids." "What's different now?" she inquired. Hector moved closer. "I've realized how much I've missed you and the kids," he confessed. "I want things to go back to how they were." Trisha slowly shook her head. "Nothing has changed," she said. "We'll reunite and you'll run off with another girl in a few weeks." "I won't do that," the man insisted. Trisha sighed. "Hector," she said, "I've had time to think. I can't forgive you, and my love for you has faded. I think we need to agree on a date to file for divorce." His face changed, and Trisha watched the facade of tenderness and remorse disappear. "Then we need to discuss property division," he said. Trisha was taken aback, but agreed. "Your car is yours, mine is mine, and the apartment is for me and the kids." Hector disagreed. "No, let's sell it and split the money equally," he said sternly. "Equally? When I'm raising 3 children alone?" Trisha retorted. The husband was embarrassed but continued to stand his ground. "I had been paying the mortgage for it, and you didn't work. You sat on my neck." "Oh, really? But I was taking care of the house and the 3 kids, and now I'm paying the mortgage. You left me out of the blue and didn't even help the kids. You can't imagine what I've been through these past few months." "Then let's get back together, and we won't have to split the apartment," the man pleaded. Trisha sighed. "No, Hector, I've already said my piece." "That's how you talk." The husband's voice lowered to a snake-like hiss. "Who's going to want you, alone with 3 kids? Do you think any man but me will look at you? You're just a stupid domestic chicken. All you can do is cook soup." Tears flowed from Trisha's eyes. It hurt to hear such words from the father of her children, the man she had loved for many years. "Go on, play hard to get," her husband continued. "You yourself will come to me on your knees." "She won't," a familiar male voice sounded behind Trisha. Before she could see what happened next, Hector suddenly flew across almost the whole restaurant and collapsed on the floor, and Nick rubbed his hand that had just collided with Hector's jaw. "It was tough, but perhaps instructive," Mr. Arnold commented. Trisha looked around and saw her boss. He looked as pleased as a cat for some reason. "And you are here?" she said in amazement. "Did you hear everything?" "I heard enough," he said dryly. Hector got up from the floor, pressing his palm to his bloody face. "We'll talk to you again," he said to Trisha. "Wow," Mr. Arnold said admiringly. "I should get out of the estate more often. It turns out it's fun here." "Shall we go home?" Nick asked Trisha. "Let's go," Trisha replied quietly, wiping away her tears. At home, he was sent to the kitchen to drink tea and calm down. "We have something to discuss with the boss," said Nick. "And you just relax for a while. I'll call you." But Trisha couldn't relax. She kept replaying what had happened in the restaurant. "Probably they will dismiss me. I doubt Mr. Arnold needs a troubled caregiver who gets his assistant into fights in the middle of the business centre. And what about the apartment? Do we still have to split it in half? Where will I and the kids live then? What if I have to find a new job? Even if I don't get fired today, the school issue is still on the table." The woman's head was filled with so many problems. "Trisha, let's go." She lifted her head. The expression on Nick's face didn't reveal what was in store for her, so she rose and obediently followed him into the chief's office. "What a spectacle you've given us today," Mr. Arnold cheerfully commented. "I am sorry," said Trisha. "I didn't anticipate things turning out this way." "That's okay. It was even amusing," said her boss. "Well, we have other matters to address now." Trisha squeezed with fear. "Do you wish to continue working here?" Mr. Arnold inquired. "Aren't you going to lay me off?" Trisha asked, surprised. "Do you want to be fired?" "No," she answered hastily. "Then I won't fire you." "Okay." Trisha was taken aback. "Your children will soon start school, so I'll provide a car and driver to transport them to and from school." Trisha was stunned. "But why?" she asked. "Because I don't want to find a new caregiver," the boss replied calmly. "Thank you," Trisha muttered. "We also need to address your living arrangements," Nick added. "What about them?" Trisha asked, confused. "Living in that house during the winter is one option," Mr. Arnold explained. "It's warm and all, but it's not very convenient to run to and fro in the frost. Let's take a look at your new rooms." "New rooms?" "There's a wing of the house that's practically empty," explained Nick. "That's where we plan to put you." They left the study and moved towards rooms Trisha had never visited before. "Why is this wing empty?" Trisha asked with curiosity. Mr. Arnold sighed. "It's part of my past," he said. "I wanted to forget it and not remember it, but now I realize it's time to leave the past behind." They entered the largest room. "This is the common room," the boss said. "There's access to 4 bedrooms from here. Just enough for you." Trisha walked around in surprise, taking in the rooms. Each room was like a separate work of art. The furniture was beautiful, tastefully selected, and pictures adorned the walls. Everything was thought out, down to the smallest detail. However, it was clear that no one had used it for many years. "I wonder why," thought Trisha. More mysteries. Suddenly, she noticed the outline of a familiar object under a white cloth. "A piano!" Trisha exclaimed in amazement. "May I?" She turned to Mr. Arnold, who shrugged his shoulders. Trisha carefully removed the white cloth that covered the instrument and ran her finger over the keys. The instrument was slightly out of tune, but certainly playable. The woman sat down and began to play the only melody she remembered, one her mother had played for her countless times since she was a child. The first few notes were difficult, but her hands soon recalled the tune, and her fingers danced effortlessly across the keys. She sat with her back to Mr. Arnold, unaware of the changes in the elderly man's expression. At first, his face stretched in astonishment. Then he turned his head, as if to confirm his ears weren't deceiving him. Soon, tears began to roll down his cheeks. Nick looked at his chief and could not hold back a surprised exclamation. "Mr. Arnold, what's wrong with you?" Trisha quickly stopped and turned, amazed, to her charge. Unashamedly, The elderly man was sobbing, wiping his face with his shirt sleeve.
"How do you know that tune?" he asked. "It was written just for me."
Once Trisha and Nick had calmed Mr. Arnold, they returned to his study, where he began his story.
"When I met Megan," he started, "I was still married to my second wife. We stopped living together for that moment, only meeting to discuss property division. I was exhausted of all this. Work, the divorce. One day after a business meeting, I let my driver leave and went to the park. I sat on a bench and realized how pleasant it was. Just sunshine, bird songs, greening trees. And then I saw Megan."
Trisha was stunned, her heart pounding. She could hardly believe what was happening.
"She was so beautiful," Mr. Arnold said dreamily. "I have never seen a woman so beautiful. And when she smiled at me, I knew I was done for."
Trisha noticed Nick looking at her, but he seemed embarrassed when she caught his eye and turned his attention back to the boss. However, Mr. Arnold seemed oblivious to his surroundings, lost in memories from over 35 years ago.
"My feet led me to her," he continued, "and for the first time in my life, I was scared. I was terrified she would refuse to know me. I've known many women, but none have struck such awe in me upon first sight." To my delight, she agreed. He smiled blissfully. "I don't think I've ever been so happy. My wife and I were already separated, so I brought Megan to this house and built this wing just for her. It's the sunniest side of the house, and the piano—"
"Did she play for you?" Trisha interrupted.
"Yes, Megan taught music, and that tune you played, she composed especially for me."
"Why did you two break up?" Trisha asked. A tear rolled down Mr. Arnold's face again.
"I was a fool," he said calmly. "I wanted to marry Megan, and she refused me. She said that she and I were from different worlds, that she didn't want to become just a rich businessman's wife and stay at home. I tried to persuade her, told her she could do whatever she wanted and be herself. But she refused and ended our relationship."
"Then why do you say it was your fault?" Trisha asked.
Mr. Arnold sighed. "Because I didn't insist on my own way. Because I gave in easily. Because I didn't find out then that she was pregnant."
Trisha looked up at him. Mr. Arnold was staring right back at her.
"Yes," he said calmly. "I'm sure you're my daughter."
Trisha blissfully stretched out her legs and lifted her head, enjoying the sun. She liked it here. The sea always had a positive effect on her, especially now they were starting vacationing as a family every year.
"Mum, did you see that? I swam faster than Brandon,"
Alicia ran up and exclaimed.
"Not faster, don't lie," the middle son shouted.
He was clearly tired and out of breath, but didn't want to admit defeat to his younger sister, who had been going to swim lessons for 3 years and showing great results there.
"I just let you win," Brandon stated.
"Sure you did," Alicia retorted. She knew her capabilities and understood her brother was swimming with all his might. Brandon ran off resentfully towards the beach house. "Honey, did you have to tease him?" Trisha gently reprimanded her daughter. "Okay, go take a shower. We'll go to dinner soon." After her daughter had run off, Trisha stretched, reluctantly got up from the sunbed and walked toward the house. She saw Zach lying in the hammock, as usual, talking on the phone. Again with his girl chattering, Trisha thought. He's all grown up now. "Dinner in half an hour," she informed him. He nodded in response, indicating that he heard his mother's words. The spacious house was cool. Mr. Arnold and Nick were, as usual, seated in the living room playing chess. "We'll be going home in 3 days. And you haven't even gotten a tan, Trisha sighed. She playfully ruffled her husband's hair and gave her father a kiss on the cheek.
Don't worry, Trisha,
her father reassured her.
We'll make it.
How's the sea? Nick inquired. Warm, Trisha responded. How's the game?
It's a draw, the father sighed. Nick is not only adopting my business acumen, but also my chess-playing skills.
Nick grinned.
I learn from the best, Mr. Arnold, he answered.
By the way, checkmate.
Oh, you?
Mr. Arnold swore. Suddenly, Alicia appeared. Grandpa, what did you say? Feigning severity, Mr. Arnold coughed in embarrassment.
Young lady, that's a phrase you're legally not allowed to say for another 8 years.
Alicia laughed. We have worse swear words at our school. And then she dashed off to the shower.
We need to change schools,
Mr. Arnold stated decisively.
I won't have my only granddaughter learning such language.
Then we may have to change grandfather too, Trisha said, laughing, because Alicia hears such words most often from you.
A fair point,
her father conceded, sighing.
I'll try to swear less often.
Trisha smiled, looking back towards the sea. Through the transparent, panoramic wall of their cottage, she could see the large red sun approaching the horizon. I feel so good, she commented, as Nick came over and wrapped his arms around her from behind.
I always feel good with you, her husband replied.
Me too, Trisha agreed, and I'm perfectly happy.
Hola, suscríbete a Historias Vitales para no perderte nuevas historias. Mi esposa había estado trabajando en su proyecto especial durante 4 meses ahora. No era su proyecto personal, pero ella era la persona principal y responsable de su éxito. El proyecto estaba diseñado para salvar a su empresa, Bixler Enterprises. Los últimos 4 meses habían sido difíciles porque se vio obligada a trabajar duro. Era importante tanto para ella como para la empresa. Había una buena posibilidad de que Bixler Enterprises quebrara si el proyecto no se completaba. Sara tenía una licenciatura de Albrecht y un MBA de Wharton. Era la más inteligente de la familia. Yo empecé a trabajar como mecánico de autos justo después de la secundaria y después de 21 años seguía siendo mecánico de autos. No me importaba porque me gustaba el trabajo y pagaba bien. Era suficiente para pagar la universidad de Sara y criar a 2 hijos. No vivíamos lujosamente, pero estábamos bien. Los niños ya se habían mudado, y las cosas iban bastante bien con nuestros ingresos. Sara quedó embarazada 3 meses después de casarnos a la edad de 18 años. Durante los primeros años de nuestro matrimonio, vivimos con mis padres. Ellos tenían una gran casa vacía ya que 4 de mis hermanos se habían mudado. Eso significaba que teníamos una niñera mientras Sara completaba sus primeros años de universidad. Debido a 2 embarazos, la carrera de 4 años le llevó 6 años completarla. Fue difícil, pero lo logró. Siempre tuve trabajo y nunca me faltó trabajo extra si lo necesitaba. Después de que Sara se graduó de Wharton, alquilamos nuestro propio lugar. Tuvo ofertas de trabajo de varias empresas grandes, pero todas requerían que nos mudáramos. A mí no me importaba, pero Sara quería quedarse cerca de casa. Por eso decidió trabajar en Bixler Enterprises. Pagaba bien, pero lo más importante, le daba responsabilidad y la oportunidad de avanzar. Sara era una empleada trabajadora y dedicada. La presentación es el jueves en el Hotel Thyssen en Filadelfia. Tomé unos días libres en el trabajo para ayudarla según fuera necesario. Al final, todo lo que logré fue hacerle algo de comer cuando llegaba a casa. No sabía nada sobre su trabajo, ni tampoco quería saber. Los negocios corporativos de alto nivel me aburrían. Empresarios de Europa, Asia y América del Sur venían aquí, la empresa pagaba sus boletos de avión y proporcionaba habitaciones en el Hotel Thyssen mientras estaban aquí. Era caro como el infierno, y por algunas cosas que Sara había dicho, la empresa estaba sobreestimando sus finanzas. Su presentación era importante para ella, para la empresa y para más de 200 empleados. Hasta el martes por la noche, todo iba bien. Sara llegó a casa con un traje nuevo, un traje gris con una blusa blanca. Desplegó todo lo que necesitaba en la cama de la habitación de invitados. Cuando se trataba de la limpieza de la casa, ella era normal, pero cuando se trataba del trabajo, era meticulosa. No entendía por qué necesitaba sacar su ropa interior de lujo, pero no dije nada. Además de su traje para la presentación, tenía varios vestidos de cóctel lindos para eventos sociales antes y después del evento. Siempre había evitado tales eventos, pero me sentía obligado a ir con ella si ella quería que lo hiciera. Me agradeció la oferta, pero dijo que no era necesario. Todos los materiales y equipos que necesitaba estaban guardados ordenadamente en el maletero de su Volvo. Antes de salir del trabajo, ella misma conducía el coche para asegurarse de que todo estuviera en perfectas condiciones. Tenía todo el día miércoles para prepararse y toda la noche del miércoles para socializar con sus invitados. Sara era tan buena en lo que hacía que sentía que habría sido mejor si simplemente me hubiera mantenido alejado de ella. Finalmente, había terminado. Lo había revisado y vuelto a revisar todo. Todo lo que necesitaba ahora era una ducha caliente y una buena noche de sueño. Supongo que mi error fue que empecé a revisar sus cosas después de que Sara comenzara a ducharse. Pensé que estaba ayudando, pero resultó ser lo contrario. Estaba moviendo cosas en la cama cuando un pequeño sobre blanco cayó del bolsillo lateral de su bolso de maquillaje. Una carta de una farmacia, pero no del tipo que solemos usar. Dentro había 10 pastillas. No tenía idea de qué era, PREN, y las instrucciones eran confusas. Si es necesario, tomar una pastilla y luego una segunda pastilla 12 horas después. Pensé que podría ser algo que ella había conseguido para la ansiedad o los nervios, pero las instrucciones no tenían sentido. La receta estaba escrita a su nombre el lunes. Volví a poner el sobre en su lugar mientras ella terminaba de ducharse. Decidí que quería saber más sobre PREN antes de contarle sobre ello. Por supuesto, si lo mencionaba, significaría que estaba revisando sus cosas. Odio los dilemas. Mientras Sara se preparaba para dormir, fui a nuestro ordenador doméstico y busqué. 10 minutos después, me uní a mi esposa bajo las sábanas. Pasé toda la noche despierto, preguntándome por qué mi esposa había recogido una receta para la píldora del día después, especialmente después de que me hicieran una vasectomía hace 10 años. A la mañana siguiente, me levanté temprano, pero no estaba descansado. Di un largo paseo, esperando que despejara mi mente. Me dirigí hacia casa con reticencia, temiendo lo que podría hacer o decir cuando llegara allí. Mi hijo Joe se unió a la Marina después de la escuela secundaria y estaba en su primer año en San Diego. Nuestra hija Gloria se casó con su amor de la infancia el año pasado y acababa de mudarse a Dallas. Eso dejaba solo a Sara y a mí. Echaba de menos a los niños, pero esperaba envejecer con mi esposa. Ella era la única mujer que me había interesado, y ahora todo estaba. Si Sara estaba teniendo una aventura, lo ocultaba bien. Por supuesto, nunca la vigilé. Nunca miré sus correos electrónicos o llamadas telefónicas. No tenía razones para hacerlo. No tenía forma de saber qué estaba haciendo en el trabajo o después del trabajo. Confiaba en ella completamente. Ion, ¿dónde demonios has estado? ¿Quieres huevos o algo? No, solo café. No me sentía con muchas ganas de hablar. ¿Qué pasa, cariño? Solo son 3 días. Puedes venir si quieres, pero te aburrirás como una ostra. No, realmente no quiero ir, pero odio dejarte sola. Me preocupo cuando no estás aquí. Es muy dulce, querido, pero estará bien. No voy a salir del hotel en todo este tiempo. Pasaré la mayor parte del día asegurándome de que la sala de conferencias esté lista, y esta noche tendré una agradable charla con nuestros posibles clientes. Mañana, probablemente ni siquiera tendré la oportunidad de ir al baño. Llegaré a casa lo más temprano posible el viernes, te prometo un gran fin de semana si sabes a lo que me refiero. Todo eso suena bien, pero no puedes culparme por preocuparme. Soy un mecánico de autos, y tengo una esposa hermosa y exitosa. A veces tengo la sensación de que estás menos interesada en mejorar nuestra situación familiar que en avanzar en tu carrera. Detente, maldita sea, Ion. Siempre he respetado lo que haces para ganarte la vida y nunca he insinuado lo contrario. Criaste a 2 grandes niños y me pusiste a través de la universidad. Eres un gran esposo, un gran padre y un buen proveedor, y nunca olvides eso. Terminé mi café mientras ella recogía la mesa. ¿Quieres que te llame? No, no es una buena idea. Tendré el móvil apagado, y voy a apagar el teléfono de la habitación por la noche para poder dormir. Te llamaré siempre que pueda. La ayudé a cargar el coche, era tan meticulosa con eso como con todo lo demás. Trabajando, le llevaría 3 horas llegar al hotel dicen. Me quedé en el porche y la vi marcharse. No me molesté en preguntarle por las pastillas. Pasé el resto de la mañana en el porche. No recuerdo haberme preocupado tanto como ahora. Me sentía pequeño e insignificante. Me sentía fuera de mi liga. Era un tipo de pueblo con un trabajo mediocre y una esposa exitosa. Era una combinación equivocada. Debería haberlo notado antes. Me sentía estúpido. El mejor traje que tenía era una chaqueta azul y un par de pantalones. Al menos tenía algunas corbatas, aunque tenían 10 años de antigüedad. Acababa de terminar de vestirme cuando sonó el teléfono fijo. Oye, cariño, solo quería avisarte de que llegué bien. ¿Tuviste un buen viaje? Supongo que el tráfico no estaba demasiado denso. Estuvo bien. Te llamaré esta noche. Ahora tengo que irme. Estoy en la habitación 714, Sara. Puedo estar en casa de mis padres o en la de mis hermanos esta noche si quieres llamarme a mi móvil. De acuerdo. Suena el teléfono móvil. Te quiero, tengo que irme. Me tomé mi tiempo para llegar a Filadelfia. No fui directo al Lisen, primero me detuve y compré un filete con queso. Prometí hacer una larga noche. No estaba seguro de qué iba a hacer. Estacioné en el garaje del hotel y simplemente esperé. Tarde o temprano, tenía que entrar en el hotel. Simplemente no podía decidir cuándo hacerlo. El sonido de mi teléfono celular me ayudó a tomar mi decisión. Ion, solo quería avisarte de que todo se ha arreglado. Ahora voy a bajar para encontrarme con algunas personas y cenar. No olvidaste nada, ¿verdad? No, todo está bien. Tengo todo en mi habitación para mañana. ¿Necesitas algo? No, Ion, relájate. Voy a apagar mi teléfono. Te llamaré mañana por la mañana. ¿De acuerdo? Ríe, diviértete. No es divertido, Ion, es trabajo. No parecía estar demasiado fuera de lugar. El vestíbulo, el restaurante y las salas de conferencias estaban llenos de gente, así que pude pasar desapercibido. Había un folleto pequeño y bonito que mostraba el diseño de todas las habitaciones del hotel. Me paseé por las diferentes habitaciones y me detuve en las paredes, mirando alrededor entre la multitud. No tenía ni idea de qué haría si Sara me veía. Lo averiguaría si y cuando eso sucediera. Encontré un tablero de eventos que enumeraba todas las habitaciones que estaban siendo utilizadas por los diversos grupos. Bixler Enterprises no tenía habitaciones disponibles para el miércoles por la noche. Esto me pareció interesante. Sara había dicho que no iba a salir del hotel, pero ahora no estaba tan seguro de eso. Había 3 comedores, familiar, informal y de alta cocina. A Sara no le gustaba mucho cenar con niños, así que fui primero al comedor informal. Solo me llevó 5 minutos asegurarme de que no estaba allí. Tuve mejor suerte en el salón gourmet. Era una acogedora mesita encajada en la esquina, el tipo de mesa que la gente reserva para tener un encuentro privado. Sara llevaba un vestido de cóctel negro con un escote pronunciado y perlas, se veía elegante y su acompañante parecía apreciarlo. Conocía a algunas personas con las que trabajaba Sara, y él no era una de ellas. Me resultaba familiar, pero no había forma de que pudiera recordarlo. Había muchas sillas libres, así que no tuve problemas para cruzar la sala. Había velas y pequeños candelabros de cristal en las mesas. Apagué la mía y le dije al camarero que me molestaba por el glaucoma. Pedí el plato de pollo de siempre y me acomodé. El camarero me sirvió el café por tercera vez. Disculpe, el tipo en la mesa de enfrente me parece muy familiar. ¿Sabes quién es? Sí, ese es Malcolm Eugene Foote. Es miembro del Consejo Municipal, se espera que se postule para el Congreso en los próximos años. ¿Es esa su esposa con él? Es muy bonita. No, esta es la primera vez que la veo. Siempre usa esa mesa para señoras especiales, si me entiende. Simplemente le sonreí y pedí la cuenta. Nunca había visto a Sara tan sensual con un hombre antes. Parecía captar cada palabra que decía, como si fuera Dios o algo así. No estaban haciendo nada inapropiado, pero tampoco era platónico ni profesional. Cuando me fui, estaban terminando su segunda botella de vino. Ahora entendía por qué se había llevado su lencería elegante. Me acomodé en una esquina del vestíbulo para que no me vieran. 10 minutos después, salieron del restaurante. Ella le tomaba la mano mientras caminaban por el vestíbulo hacia el ascensor. Observé cuidadosamente los indicadores de piso. Que el ascensor se detuviera en el tercer piso era una buena señal, significaba que no lo había llevado a su habitación. Era una mala señal cuando el ascensor no llegaba al séptimo piso, significaba que ella fue a su habitación. Por si acaso me equivocaba en algo, me senté en el vestíbulo y observé el ascensor durante 1 hora. La gente entraba y salía, pero Sara no estaba entre ellos. Saqué mi maleta vacía del coche y me dirigí al mostrador de recepción. Aunque podía demostrar que era su esposo, me costó trabajo conseguir una tarjeta llave. Se dieron después de llamar a la habitación, pero nadie respondió. Finalmente, estaba en camino a la habitación 714 con la tarjeta llave. Ni siquiera encendí las luces al principio, simplemente me senté en la oscuridad de la habitación durante más de 1 hora. No fue difícil asegurarme de que no regresara a la habitación. Primero, empacé todas sus ropas y pertenencias personales. No dejé nada atrás. Revisé el paquete de Preven, todavía quedaban 10 pastillas en el tocador. De manera muy ordenada, estaban todos los artículos que necesitaría para su presentación al día siguiente. Comencé a llenar la maleta. Había 24 carpetas promocionales especialmente encuadernadas y otras 20 carpetas regulares, todas ellas fueron a la maleta. Un proyector digital fue lo siguiente, seguido de una computadora portátil. Tomé su bolso y su celular, que había dejado en la habitación. Todo lo que tenía consigo era un bolso de mano y probablemente un tubo de lápiz labial. Di una vuelta por la habitación tan cuidadosamente como lo hizo ella para asegurarme de no perder nada. Una vez satisfecho, dejé las llaves del coche y mi anillo de bodas en el tocador. Aparte de esos 2 objetos, la habitación estaba completamente vacía. El ascensor se dirigió directamente al estacionamiento, no tuve problemas para llevar 2 maletas, y 20 minutos después, estaba en la autopista rumbo al norte. Pasaban las 3 de la madrugada, no tenía idea de que había pasado tanto tiempo. 1 hora o 2 después, sonó mi teléfono celular, la identificación de llamadas mostraba el número del Dicen. ¿Ion? Sí, ¿dónde estás? Estaré en casa pronto. Eso fue todo lo que dije. Hubo silencio en el otro extremo de la línea. Los vendedores tienen un viejo dicho, el primero que habla pierde. Pareció una eternidad antes de que ella hablara. Ion, lo siento. No preguntó nada y simplemente colgó. Apagué mi teléfono, era obvio que había regresado a su habitación. Más tarde ese día, tenía que dar una presentación que salvaría a su empresa y le daría un ascenso. Metí las maletas en el desván del garaje. Sara nunca iba allí y nunca pensó en buscar algo allí. Por supuesto, en este punto, estoy bastante seguro de que no importaba. Primero, recogí todas mis ropas y pertenencias personales. La mayoría de los hombres tienen sus propias herramientas, generalmente es un requisito para el trabajo. Pasé por la tienda, cargué las mías en el Subaru y recogí mi último cheque de pago. Para entonces, los bancos ya estaban abiertos, no tuve que hacer ninguna manipulación financiera complicada. Simplemente retiré todo el dinero de mis cuentas. Almorcé en Hagerstown, Maryland. Tenía suficiente dinero para vivir durante unos años, pero sabía que estaría buscando trabajo muy pronto. Sara y yo éramos parecidos en eso de que a ambos nos encantaba trabajar. La voy a extrañar. Pasé un par de horas en las cuevas del Uray y alquilé una habitación cerca de Whitewell. No tenía idea de qué iba a hacer. Era sábado, y me encontré sentado en el acuario de Chattanooga, observando la naturaleza que nunca había visto antes. Pasé unas horas simplemente relajándome y decidí que era un buen lugar para estar. Compré un pase anual para el acuario y, para la hora de la cena, tenía un lugar donde quedarme. Era un remolque móvil en el parque, pero estaba amueblado y era económico. No necesitaba mucho. La primera cosa que haría el lunes por la mañana sería conseguir un trabajo. Un buen hombre de mantenimiento siempre puede conseguir un trabajo, especialmente si está dispuesto a trabajar duro. Podría permanecer discreto hasta que fuera el momento de renovar mi licencia de conducir o las etiquetas del coche. Me preocuparé por eso cuando llegue el momento. El domingo por la tarde, llamé a Gloria. Me sentí obligado a informarle sobre lo que estaba sucediendo, pero Sara ya se lo había contado. Fue bastante franca con Gloria sobre lo que había pasado. Dijo que había engañado, que la sorprendí, que me fui y que ella perdió su trabajo. Me sentí mal porque ella perdió su trabajo, pero ese era el precio que tenía que pagar. Le pedí a Gloria que le dijera a Josh lo que estaba sucediendo la próxima vez que hablara con él. También le dije que la llamaría aproximadamente una vez al mes para verificar cómo iban las cosas. No le dije dónde estaba. Para el mediodía del día siguiente, tenía un trabajo. En realidad, estaba a poca distancia del parque de remolques, con el Waffle House a mitad de camino. ¿Qué más podría querer un hombre? No sé cómo manejaron el papeleo, pero me estaban pagando $20 por hora sin hacer preguntas. Estaba feliz, y ellos también. Ni siquiera tendría que tocar el dinero que traje conmigo. Unos 2 meses después, Gloria me informó que Sara se había mudado de la casa y estaba viviendo con sus padres. Gloria no sabía nada más, pero estaba feliz de que estuviera estable y le estuviera yendo bien. Josh me llamó desde San Diego solo para informarme que iba a hacer un crucero. Era técnico en aviónica en un portaaviones. Intentó explicar qué hacía exactamente, pero estaba más allá de mi comprensión. Nunca supe mucho sobre cosas técnicas. Ambos tuvieron cuidado de no decir nada malo sobre su madre. Aprecié eso. Después de eso, todo siguió como siempre. Comencé a hablar con Gloria al menos semanalmente. Josh y yo comenzamos a enviar correos electrónicos regularmente. Gloria hablaba regularmente con Sara, pero decía muy poco sobre lo que estaba haciendo o dónde estaba. Nunca presenté la solicitud de divorcio, y parece que Sara tampoco lo hizo. Tengo una licencia de conducir de Tennessee y las etiquetas en el Subaru. Comencé a frecuentar un bar local un par de veces al mes y tuve encuentros casuales. 2 mujeres se alternaban como mis compañeras nocturnas regulares. No buscaban compromisos, y yo tampoco. Parecía funcionar bien para todos nosotros. La vida era buena. Eso fue hace mucho tiempo, y gradualmente olvidé a Sara. Con el tiempo, el Subaru comenzó a darme problemas. Había olvidado cuánto tiempo había pasado. Tenía más de 200,000 millas. Estaba reflexionando sobre esto con una jarra de cerveza un día cuando me di cuenta de que habían pasado casi 5 años desde que me fui de casa. Mantuve un contacto cercano con ambos hijos. Gloria ya tenía 2 hijos propios en este momento y quería que los visitara. Josh casi se casó con una mujer tailandesa, pero en el último momento se negó. Por lo general, trabajaba 6 días a la semana y usaba el domingo para recuperarme del sábado por la noche. No había ninguna buena razón para que alguien llamara a la puerta de mi remolque a las 6 de la mañana de un viernes. Su grosería fue recompensada por un hombre medio desnudo abriendo la puerta. Los calzoncillos del día son repugnantes, y la dama en la puerta, juzgando por la expresión en su rostro, estuvo de acuerdo conmigo. Ella apartó la mirada, pero su compañero no parecía impresionado. Norm habría usado pantalones, pero en un momento como este, los invitados me molestaron. Estamos buscando a John Terrell. No los conozco. Me llamo David Simmons, y esta es mi esposa Mara. Tenemos un problema y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Lo siento mucho, no trabajo a altas horas de la noche. Si necesitan algo relacionado con su auto, tendrán que ir a la tienda. Esto provocó varias miradas en blanco y finalmente una respuesta. No tiene nada que ver con tu trabajo, es más un problema personal. ¿Podemos entrar? El interior del remolque lucía desordenado, rara vez tenía invitados, así que rara vez lo limpiaba. Incluso mis novias insistían en que fuéramos a su lugar. Hagan como en su casa, déjenme ponerme los pantalones enseguida. Al entrar en el dormitorio, dejé la puerta abierta solo para mostrarles lo hospitalario que soy. También me puse una camisa. ¿Les gustaría tomar café? Solo tomará unos 10 minutos. Aparté algunas cosas del sofá para que pudieran sentarse. No hubo respuesta a la pregunta del café. Tenemos una hija adoptiva de 4 años y otra de 2 que necesita un trasplante de médula ósea, y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Estamos dispuestos a pagarte si es necesario. ¿Con mi médula ósea? No, queremos usarla y estamos dispuestos a compensarte por cualquier inconveniente. Creo que quieren comprarla. Estaba actuando como un listillo, y de repente me di cuenta de ello. Estas personas eran serias, tenían un problema real y estaban buscando ayuda. Lo siento mucho, no quise interrumpir. Por favor, continúen. Nuestra mejor oportunidad de encontrar un donante es un familiar cercano. Eres nuestra mejor esperanza. Mira esto. No quiero ser un grosero, pero creo que se equivocaron de persona. ¿Cuándo nació su hija? Cumplirá 5 años en julio. Marche Simmons habló por primera vez, y sonó sincera. Odio ser el portador de malas noticias, pero me hice una vasectomía hace 15 años. No hay forma de que pueda ser su padre. ¿Por qué tu nombre estaba en el certificado de nacimiento? No puedo responder eso, tal vez deberían preguntarle a su madre. Esa afirmación fue recibida con silencio. Sentí pena por estas personas, pero no sabía cómo ayudarles. ¿Cuál es el nombre de la madre? Sarah Lise Terrell. No encontraba las palabras. Tal vez no debería haber tomado esas malditas pastillas de ella, por supuesto, entonces esas personas no tendrían una hija en absoluto. Todo lo que pensaba que había superado el dolor, y aquí está de nuevo, viejos recuerdos de mi esposa teniendo relaciones sexuales con ese maldito político de Filadelfia. Estaba empezando a olvidarlo todo, y ahora estaba de vuelta. Maldita sea. Ahora entiendo y pido disculpas por mi grosería e insensibilidad. Haré todo lo que esté en mi poder para ayudarles. En primer lugar, porque no puede Sara hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Médicamente, no puede. ¿Por qué no? Es madre, tiene que ser una donante adecuada. Ella es una donante adecuada, pero está demasiado enferma. Los médicos se negaron siquiera a considerar utilizarla. ¿Enferma de qué? Está muriendo de insuficiencia hepática. Le quedan menos de 6 meses de vida. Esto no tiene sentido. Siempre ha estado perfectamente sana. Además, no creo que un hígado enfermo le impida donar médula ósea. El hospital no aceptará su firma en el formulario de consentimiento. ¿Estás diciendo que hay algo mal en su cabeza? Ambos me miraron en silencio, sabían la respuesta, pero no querían decirlo. En ese momento, no quería que se sintieran aún más incómodos. Hace 10 minutos, no me importaban, pero ahora sentía que tenía que protegerlos y ayudarlos. ¿Cómo sucedió esto? ¿Podría alguno de mis hijos ayudar? Quizás, pero pensamos que eras nuestra mejor esperanza. ¿Por qué no van tras su padre, su verdadero padre? Pensamos que eras tú. No tenemos ni idea de quién más podría ser. Sara no nos dijo nada sobre otro posible padre. De hecho, ella no estaba en condiciones de explicar nada, agregó Mara. Obtuvimos la mayoría de nuestra información de la agencia de adopción. Tuve que preparar café y hacer pis, permítanme un momento. Dejé a mis invitados sentados mientras preparaba el café. Solo tomó unos minutos. Mientras se preparaba, fui al baño, algo que necesitaba hacer urgentemente. Traté de ser discreto, ya había avergonzado lo suficiente a Mara. ¿Dónde viven? En Westchester, Pensilvania. Les haré una oferta. Si les digo quién es el verdadero padre de su hija, deben prometerme que lo perseguirán sin descanso hasta obtener lo que desean. ¿De qué estás hablando? El padre de su hija es un político prominente en Pensilvania. Por supuesto, negará todo y probablemente les proporcionará documentos legales para detener sus esfuerzos. Si acuerdan presionar lo suficiente para que él admita que la niña es suya, podrán avergonzarlo y obligarlo a hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Eso es lo que quieren, ¿verdad? Sí, claro, pero ¿cómo hacemos eso? No lo sé. Soy mecánico. Trabajo con metal para ganarme la vida. Creo que la mejor manera sería utilizar la televisión, la radio y los periódicos. Los políticos harán cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. ¿Tienen amigos que puedan ayudar? Bueno, ahora ambos estaban sonriendo. Debo haber dicho algo que les dio esperanza. Creo que podemos hacer esto. ¿Quién demonios es él? Malcolm Eugene Foote. Se postula para el Senado de los Estados Unidos. Apuesto a que hará cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. El café estaba listo, pero David y Marshall no podían esperar para llegar a casa. Antes de irse, les dije cómo ponerse en contacto con Gloria y Josh en caso de que los necesitaran. Estaba seguro de que ayudarían. También les pedí que me dijeran dónde estaba Sara. Probablemente estaría en Pensacola antes de que ellos regresaran a Westchester. Me corté el pelo y compré una camisa nueva. Sara era una tramposa que arruinó mi vida, pero aún así quería lucir bien cuando la viera. Era otro remolque, pero esta vez era un bonito doble nuevo. Allí estaba su Volvo con una llanta desinflada y un parabrisas roto. La mujer que abrió la puerta no era Sara, parecía que la habían empapado fuerte y la habían dejado empapada. Tenía al menos 45, tal vez 50, y debió haber tenido una vida difícil. La falta de maquillaje no ayudaba, y simplemente se veía horrible. No tuve la oportunidad de abrir la boca. Caray, si no es John Terrell. Nunca esperé verte aquí. Tuve que usar la vieja línea, me estás poniendo en desventaja. Sherry Hart. Pasa, entra. ¿Quieres una cerveza? No, pero gracias. Estoy aquí para ver a Sara. Sherry cruzó la habitación y se detuvo en el buffet del comedor. Aquí está, John. Mírala todo lo que quieras. Su mano señalaba una urna de latón que estaba en el centro del buffet vacío. Supongo que llegué demasiado tarde. No me moví, solo me quedé mirando el contenedor frente a mí. ¿Puedo tomar una cerveza ahora? Sara se mudó a Pensacola después de dar a su bebé en adopción. Compró el remolque con el dinero que recibió de Bixler Enterprises después de que la despidieron. Tenía una participación en las ganancias, 401k, y vacaciones y días de enfermedad. Eventualmente, consiguió un trabajo en una fábrica local de prendas de vestir donde trabajaba en el departamento de envíos. Allí fue donde conoció a Serry. Serry alquilaba una habitación de Sarah. Cada centavo que Sarah ganaba iba para el alcohol. Empezó con vino y gradualmente pasó a bebidas más fuertes, las más baratas. Eventualmente, perdió su trabajo debido a su alcoholismo y se vio obligada a usar sus ahorros. Nunca salió con nadie ni salió a ningún lado. Serry se quedó con ella, pagó sus servicios públicos y compró alimentos que Sarah no comía. Le llevó más de 3 años quitarse la vida. Increíblemente, ella tenía un testamento y me dejó un doble remolque y un Volvo. Serry explicó que Sarah estaba tan angustiada por lo que había hecho que simplemente se rindió. No intentó evitar el embarazo ni siquiera terminarlo. La adopción se había arreglado meses antes de que naciera el bebé. Nunca volvió a trabajar, excepto en los trabajos clandestinos que hacía mal. Serry dijo que Sarah no parecía tener ambición ni propósito en la vida. Sarah hablaba mucho de mí pero tenía miedo de intentar contactarme. Gloria le dio mi número, pero nunca me llamó. Era como si su aventura de una noche la hubiera lastimado más a ella que a mí. Estuve allí durante 2 semanas y luego vendí el remolque de Serry por $1 y obtuve $3,000 por el Volvo. 2 días después, estaba en Westchester visitando a mis nuevos amigos David y Marche. Malcolm Eugene Foot resistió al principio, pero David y Marche lo presionaron hasta que cedió. Insistió en pruebas de ADN, que demostraron que era el padre. Para salvar la cara, más o menos lo obligaron a someterse a un trasplante de médula ósea, que fue exitoso. La carrera política y la vida familiar de Malcolm no dejaron una impresión favorable. Su caída en las encuestas fue tan rápida que el partido lo reemplazó por otro candidato unos meses antes de las elecciones. Su esposa solicitó el divorcio y fue muy pública al respecto. Sarah y yo estamos viajando ahora a Dallas para ver a Gloria y a mis nietos. No sé cuánto tiempo mantendré a Sarah conmigo, probablemente hasta que tenga a alguien.